Hello everybody, it's Murray here and welcome back to my channel, M Stewart Paintings. On today's acrylic painting tutorial, we're going to paint this gorgeous coastal landscape painting. I'm going to teach you how to mix realistic paint recipes and how to blend them to create an underpainting, how to use soft blues and create detail to push things far away into the distance to create perspectives such as mountains and cliffs, how to use darker shadows to bring things forward such as rocks and pebbles, and then how to put detail over the top of your blended underpainting to create realism and create this gorgeous beach landscape acrylic painting. So let's get into it. So a nice easy painting tutorial today. We're going to need the following colours. They are titanium white, cad yellow, burnt sienna, sap green, phthalo turquoise, cerulean blue, cobalt blue, iris purple, burnt umber and matte black. Now I've got a coastal scene. I've used burnt sienna just to tint the canvas, and I've used cobalt blue just to create a mountain in the far distance. We're going to have some rocks a bit closer to create some perspective. We're going to have an ocean beach coming into land, and here we're going to have some shallow water. We're going to have a deep ocean in the far distance, and we're going to have some wet sand and some sand. So if you want to copy down the outline, feel free to pause the video. If not, we will get started. So just like always, we're going to create a background sky. So we're going to always start at the back of the painting and work our way forward towards the viewer. So we're going to create a really pastel sky. So we're going to use predominantly titanium white. We're going to use a little tiny bit of cerulean blue, which is a bit more turquoise, and a tiny bit of cobalt blue, which is a bit more cooler. And we're just going to add a dot of purple, just a dot, and just to make it a little bit cooler, so just a little pinprick, but predominantly white. And we're going to make a really pastel light blue sky. So all we're going to do, just like always, we're just going to use a large brush and we're just going to block in the area of our painting. Don't worry if you get any streak marks or any of the burnt sienna shining through. I always use burnt sienna to tint my canvas, just so for this reason I can see, especially when using pastel colours, areas which I need to make the paint thicker or give it a second coat of paint. But you don't have to paint your canvas burnt sienna. It's totally a preference. I just find it easier for me. So if you're like me and you get horrible streak marks shining through, just like here, just load up your brush, dry your painting with a hairdryer, or just let it air dry for 5 minutes. Just remix the colour. So it's titanium white, tiny bit of cerulean blue, a tiny bit of cobalt blue, and a dot of purple. Add plenty of titanium white, just so it's nice and pastel. And look, once the canvas is dry, look how much brighter that is just from putting a second layer of paint on your painting. So as I say, don't be afraid to just dry your work with a hairdryer and just go over the top. And we'll block in our sky. So really easy to start. So I hope lots of you guys are writing down, maybe on your phones or on a little notepad, some of these paint recipes, because what you can do is you can take these recipes for things like skies and rocks and oceans, and you can apply them to your own paintings. So they're really handy once you know the colours and the mixing to create the realism. I hope it helps, and I hope you can apply it to your own artwork. So don't worry if your horizon's a bit wonky, we'll neaten that up with some tape later. But what we really want to do is we want to create perspective in this painting. That's what I want to teach you today. So the first thing we're going to do is on the right hand side, we're going to create a deep ocean. So if you think of water, the more shallow it gets, the more see-through it gets. But in the far deep water, it's going to be very blue and very dark. So we're going to mix some cobalt blue, which is very dark blue. And we're going to add a little bit of phthalo turquoise and a tiny bit of purple to make it nice and dark. Now I appreciate not everyone has phthalo turquoise, so you can make that with a little bit of cobalt blue, a little bit of yellow and a little bit of sap green if you haven't got phthalo turquoise at home. So we're just going to add a little bit of white to the mix just so it's not as harsh. And a little bit of brown. Now brown is really good for making things look earthy and realistic, and it gives it that sort of greeny tinge that the ocean has, that sea colour. So just by adding a tiny bit of brown, it just makes our painting look more realistic. So this area, if you imagine this area here, is going to be really far deep water. So that's why we're doing this really dark blue. And all we're going to do is, just like we did with the sky, we're just going to block our painting in. So we're going to come down here and we're going to stop as we get a little bit more shallow, because we'll change colour to make it more shallow as we come towards the beach. But we just want to block in and imply deep ocean water with this nice dark blue. So I was going to have a big rock here, but I think it would look nicer if we just come in and create sort of a cove. So I'm going to come right in here. So as again, if you have any burnt sienna shining through, you can always just, once you've blocked all your painting in, you can always just dry it with a hairdryer and just reapply the paint. The thing with acrylics, because they're water based, unlike oils, they're a bit transparent. Sometimes you get a bit of the underpainting shining through. So if you've got a white canvas, you might not notice that as much. So hence the fact to always use burnt sienna. Now when you're happy with your ocean blocked in, please dry your work before applying any painting tape. And then what we're going to do, we're just going to measure a straight horizon. Just going to use some painting tape just to create a nice straight line. I'm going to stick it down on the dry canvas, and I'm just going to use that colour we use for the deep ocean just to go right up to the tape and create a nice straight horizon. I'm going to leave this area a little bit wonky because I'm going to have some cliffs coming down into the ocean. And then, as I say, if you've got any of the burnt sienna shining through, just rework it. Just for some reason I've got a big scratch here on my canvas. It must be my nail or something. And all I'm going to do, look, just go over the top and just cover it all up. So the great thing about acrylics, they're so easy to fix any problems. They're perfect for beginners and intermediate painters. And you can just dry it and get on with it. It's so quick and easy. So that's all nice and easy. So we're going to remove our painting tape and we should have a nice straight horizon. If you've got any gaps like me, you can always use a bit of the sky colour just to neaten it up. But what we're going to do now, we're going to create a shallow beach. So the water as it comes towards the beach gets more shallow. So my mix here has got a bit dry. It's a bit haggard. So I'm just going to remix it. So it was cobalt blue, bit of cerulean blue, a little bit of phthalo turquoise. So cobalt blue, cerulean blue, phthalo turquoise, a tiny bit of brown and some white. So we're just going to remake it. It's a bit shade lighter than the previous one, so we're just going to add some more blue, a little bit of purple. That's pretty close, isn't it? That's pretty close to how it was. So what we're going to do to make it more shallow, we're going to add some yellow, and it's going to make it more turquoise. So we're going to add some yellow, and we're going to add a little bit of burnt sienna to sort of counterbalance that and make it look more grey. So a little bit of burnt sienna. If you haven't got burnt sienna, you could use a little bit of orange and brown together, and that will make burnt sienna. And there we go. We've got this nice turquoise sort of greyish colour, this grey bluey green. And all we're going to do, we're just going to block in up to that deep ocean. We're not going to blend it just yet. We're just going to go right up to it. So this is all the water. As it gets more shallow, it gets more turquoise. So as it comes towards the beach, it's sort of like knee height, isn't it? This is sort of the nice shallow water. And the reason it gets more turquoise is it starts to blend with the sand, you see. And it starts to get a bit more greeny brown. So look, there we go. Nice and easy. So I'm just going to come in here, just block all this area in. Going to have some rocks, I think, here in the foreground, just sort of poking through the water. Could be quite a rocky beach. So again, look, if it dries a bit haggard, just do the same trick. Just go over the top, get all those horrible brush marks out. I know it's a bit repetitive, but just doing it and just reworking your underpainting. So this is all the underpainting before we put all the detail on top. I'm just going to make this area a little bit more shallow using that colour. So this is all the sort of shallow water coming into that cove. Yeah, by just going over the top, what it does is it just makes your work look more realistic and more professional because you haven't got any of the canvas shining through. So now we're going to blend the two colours. So all we're doing, we're just going to mix the two colours together. So we've got the dark blue and the lighter, more turquoise blue. We're going to mix them two together. And all we're going to do, we're going to create X shapes with our brush and really, really gently push down onto the canvas. So hardly any pressure. So really, really gently. So I'm barely touching the canvas. Look, almost if that was my finger, I'm just literally just sort of applying a tiny bit of pressure and just merging the two colours together by just touching it. And we're just going to make those transitions really, really, really smooth so you barely notice the change in colour. So now as we get more into the beach, we're going to get even more shallow. So we're going to create some more wet water sort of coming into the sand. So we're going to get some more brown and add that to the mix. And then we're going to get some purple. So brown and purple. And a little bit of white. I've added a tiny bit of white off camera, just a tiny bit. And some yellow. And we'll see if this is too dark. So a little bit of burnt sienna just to warm it up a bit. Now acrylics always dry a little bit darker, so a good test is that if you see it is too dark, you can always just add a little bit of white to lighten it up. But by adding that white, it's gone a bit grey, so we're just going to put some more brown back into it. A little bit of purple, a little bit of yellow, and a tiny bit of burnt sienna to warm it back up. There we go. So we've made it a lighter shade just by adding the same colours and white. That looks better. So we've created this warm sort of browny grey, and this is all the wet water. So it's really, really shallow. That sort of mixes into the beach. So all we're going to do, look, we're just going to do the same trick as we did before. We're going to go right up to that previous colour. We're not going to blend it yet. We're just going to block it all in. And then maybe a little bit here, just as it gets more shallow. And then what we're going to do, we're just going to do the same little trick. Look, we're just going to gradually blend the two, just using our X shape with our brush. I've got hardly any paint on my brush. I'm just touching really gently onto the canvas, and I'm just blending the two shades to make the transitions look seamless. Super easy. There we go. Now I want to make this corner a little bit darker, so I'm going to use the previous colour, the previous shade, the middle shade that we used, and I'm just going to glaze over the top of this bottom right hand corner. Now the reason I'm doing that is because I always darken up my corners to get the viewer to focus down the middle of the painting. So it's a little trick. So just by using a darker shade, I'm just gradually blending it in, and it just frames the painting by just having a little bit of a darker colour. Now we're going to do the wet sand now, so we're going to use a very similar colour to our sky, and this is going to be the reflection of the sky onto the wet sand. So we're going to get cerulean blue and cobalt blue, because that's what we did for our sky, a tiny bit of purple, and predominantly white. So we're going to make a nice pastel blue again, loads of white. And we're just going to make it a little bit darker than the sky. So just a little bit more cobalt blue, which is a little bit cooler, but still predominantly white. And this is going to be all our wet sand as it comes up onto the beach. We're going to take a tiny bit of the previous shallow colour. So just a little bit of brown, just to make it more earthy and realistic. And all we're going to do, we're just going to outline this area. And this is all the shiny wet sand as the water sort of retracts back, and it leaves that sort of shimmering wet sand you get on the beach. So by using the sky colour, you can sort of have it reflecting and making it look like a reflection of the sky. You could do this same trick with sunsets. So say we had a red sky, you could do this shimmering wet sand in red. And if you had a pink sky, pink, and so forth and so forth. So it's a really nice, easy trick. So we've got this nice pastel blue. And all I'm going to do, I'm just going to add a little bit of the previous colour to my brush. And I'm just, again, going to make the transitions look just a little bit more seamless, not as harsh. But just mixing a little bit of brown into the mix. Just to smoothen it up. So as I say, all these paint recipes, all these colours are the things that are creating the realism. It's learning your colours. So we're going to take some burnt sienna, which is that orangey brown. And we're going to mix a little bit of that pastel blue. And we're going to add a little bit of yellow. And we're just going to try and make a sort of warm colour. And we're going to use a little bit of purple just to sort of desaturize it and make it more rocky. And a little bit of yellow. So we'll see again if that's too bright, if it's too harsh. You only know by experimenting. So let's have a look. That's okay. And all we're going to do, look, we're just going to create some terrain in our sand. So we're just going to use a dark colour. We're going to leave little gaps. Again, I'm going to darken this corner, just like we did here, because that's where I'm going to sign it. So I need a dark colour in my left-hand corner so my signature stands out. And all I'm doing, look, I'm just leaving odd gaps from some of that lighter burnt sienna to shine through, just to create the illusion of texture on my sand. So I kind of like that colour, it's really, really nice. So why not use it? Why not use it for some of the mountain terrain? So all I'm going to do, I'm just going to create some shadows using this colour to create the illusion. If I zoom in for you. So what we're going to do, we're going to leave gaps and we're going to create the illusion of boulders and rocks. So by leaving gaps so the brighter colour can shine through, you can just create the illusion of rocks and shadows. So you don't want to cover the whole thing in. You just want to just create shapes. And this sort of implies terrain. But we don't want it too detailed because remember this is really far away into the distance. So I'm just going to give it a bit of an outline. Because normally sort of cliff tops they have a bit of sort of dry grass and stuff on the top. So if the sunlight, say, let's have the sunlight coming from the right, these sort of edges would be getting the sun. And then over here on the left would be a bit more in the shade. So let's sort of colour in the left here. The top, there we go. And leave those sort of edges sort of looking like they're in the sun. There we go. And then on these nearer rocks, why don't we do the same? So if you imagine these rocks have got their sort of back to the sun. So if the sunlight's coming here, they're going to cast quite a lot of shadow. So what you can do is you can do this little trick. Look, you can sort of think, well, if there was a rock there, this would sort of cast a shadow here. And again, look, we're leaving plenty of that brighter colour that we stained the canvas with to shine through. We're not covering it all up. And then that looks like areas that are in the sun. And these areas look a little bit more in the shade. So look how easy this is. You're just creating 3D rocks, just using shadow. We're not even putting the highlights on because we've got that lovely bright colour. It's already making them look more 3D. So we're going to mix a bit of a shadow tone now. So we're going to get some blue and some purple. Sorry if it's a bit off camera, I didn't realise how zoomed in I was. So blue, purple, here we go. And a little bit of burnt sienna. So cobalt blue, plenty of cobalt blue because that's nice and cool. A little bit of purple and some burnt sienna. And we're just going to create a pastel blue shadow colour. So we're going to cover up some of this cobalt blue and use a cooler colour to imply shadows. So these are all the bits of rocks that aren't getting any sunlight, and they're leaving a nice cool shadow. And because we've got our outline, it's actually really easy because we can just go over the top of it. So again, these are just areas of the rocks that are in the shade. You've got the in-between brown. These sort of areas that are getting some sunlight but not too much. And then you've got the real bright highlights. And between the three tones, it creates the illusion of some areas in the shade and some in the sun. Now the reason we use these pastel blue and purple and burnt sienna is because it's not as harsh, it's not as harsh a shadow, and what it does is by putting it here on this background cliff top, it has some shadows but it pushes the area right far back and it creates the illusion of perspective and distance. So again, these paint recipes that I'm trying to teach you, they're really handy because you can create the illusion of far off things just by using colours. And then what we'll do is we'll mix a harsher, more darker shadow, and we'll make the rocks at the bottom here a little bit harsher in a minute and bring them closer. So all I've done here, I've mixed some cobalt blue and some burnt sienna like we had previously, but I've added burnt umber. So burnt umber is very dark brown. And I've got plenty of the cobalt blue to make it really harsh, so it's an off black, it's not quite black. And all I've done, look, I've just gone over what we just painted in a harsher, darker shadow. And I'm just going to do the same on some of these rocks here in the ocean. And what that does, can you see, by using a darker shadow on these nearer rocks, it brings it forward, and using a pastel, more bluer shadow in the background, it pushes that cliff far off into the distance. And again, look, I'm just going to darken up the corners. I'm using a flat-headed brush, and I'm just creating the illusion of terrain. So this could be all sort of pebbles and bits. And again, it's just so I'm going to sign it. So look, by just having a difference between the shadows, it pushes some areas back, and having harsher shadows in the foreground brings things forward. So we're going to get some highlights now. So now we've done the shadows, we're going to mix some cad yellow and some titanium white together to create a Naples yellow. We're going to add a little bit of burnt sienna just to warm it up again. And then we're going to add some more white. And we're just trying to create a little bit of brown just to make it more earthy and realistic. We're just trying to create a really harsh bright highlight. So these are all the areas of the rocks that are getting the sunlight. So if you imagine the sun is coming from the right, all the right sort of tips of these rocks would be getting really glared with sunlight. So I'm just going to add a little bit more burnt sienna to it. I'm going to make it a bit more orangey, more brick tone. A little bit of yellow. Just load up my brush, let's test it. It's hard to notice here on camera, but it's a shade brighter. Just looks nicer. So all these sort of ones, they're all in the sunlight. And what you can do using this colour, look, you can just sort of change shapes of the rocks. You could add bits, look, this bit's a bit harsh with the shadows, so I'm just going to brighten it up area. Could put some pebbles, and this could be a little cove, couldn't it? A little cave or something, so we could just add some little pebbles. And if you get a big splodge, look, you can just use your finger just to smear it. Don't ever worry. And the great thing is as I keep saying to you, if you dry your work at each stage, if you do make a mistake, you can just use a baby wipe and just wipe it away. So let's have some pebbles coming here. and the shallows. So we're not going to go too detailed because I want this tutorial for beginners and intermediate painters. We just really want to work on the colours today. So I'm not going to, even though I'm doing this out of my imagination, I'm not going to make it too detailed for everyone. So we're just going to take some bright white now. I'm going to mix it into that mix just to create a really sort of buttery yellow colour. And again, we're just going to put some really harsh highlights now, just on the tips of some of these rocks. So these are the bits that get really blared by the sun. It's really subtle, just the very edges. And then what we're going to do, we're going to use that colour to come in here into the shallows and go up into the beach. So this is all the sort of wet sand that's sort of glistening in the sunlight. So if I zoom in for you, all I'm doing, I'm just creating sort of straight lines coming diagonally down. So this is sort of the highlights. Now we've got all the shadows, so they complement one another. So I'm just making this really nice and bright. So this could be the sort of shimmer on the water. So there we go. So we've got this fantastic pushback cliff. We've got these harsher shadows bringing the rocks forward. We've got our lovely blended ocean. So we're going to use a flat brush and we're going to create some detail now over the top for things like waves. So we're going to mix the colour we used for our ocean before. So we're going to make some cerulean blue, cobalt blue, burnt umber, a little bit of purple, some burnt sienna and some yellow. And it's a bit too light, so I'm going to put more cobalt blue in, tiny bit of phthalo turquoise. Still a bit too light, so I need to make it more bluer. A little bit more brown. What I'm trying to do, I'm trying to create a harsh colour because I need it to be darker because it's going to be the shadow of the wave. So let's put a bit more burnt sienna just to make it harsher, darker. There we go, look how dark that is. So we've got this nice dark wave colour. I'm going to wipe away most of the paint off my brush. So I've got a flat brush. Now flat brushes are excellent for creating straight lines. And what I'm going to do, while the canvas is nice and dry and I've got hardly any paint, I'm going to create the shadow for my waves. I'm going to create diagonal straight lines going across my canvas. So this is all the shadow when the water rises up and you get these lovely big fat waves. So look, by using the tip of the brush, I can create nice straight lines and I can create sort of the caps of the waves. So look, if I zoom in for you, so it's easy to see. Look, I'm going to load up my brush with that colour. So it's a really nice dark harsh colour. I'm going to wipe away lots and lots of the paint, and then I've got a dry canvas. My brush is dry, and all I'm doing, I'm just using the chalky paint residue to push down with that flat edge and create the illusion of waves. And because we've got that nice blended underpainting, now we're putting all the detail over the top. It will trick the viewer's eyes and create the realism. So look, you can even go with the edge and create little sharp wave tops here in the distance. And then all I'm going to do, I'm just going to mix some white into that mix. So lots and lots of white into the mix to make it less harsh. And I'm going to add a little bit of burnt sienna, just a tiny bit, and a little bit of cerulean blue to make it more turquoise. So loads of white into that mix we just made for the waves. And we're going to make a lighter shade, and all we're going to do is around our rocks we're just going to shade it in. So we've created this nice sort of whitey turquoise, and all we're going to do, we're going to do the same trick. We're just going to use the edge of our flat brush, and around all these sort of rocks, this is sort of all the areas of wash when the water sort of bangs up against the rocks and it creates sort of wash and bubbles. So we're just going to shade it in, and we're going to do the same here. So we're just going to come underneath these rocks, just with this light turquoise colour. It's really subtle. Creates sort of wash where the water's sort of striking the rocks. Okay, so we've got this lovely 3D effect now. I'm going to take some white and we're going to add it to our highlight colour that we use for the sand. So if yours is dry, all we want to do is create an off-white. So white and a little bit of yellow and a dot of brown. And all we're going to do is start adding some of the sea foam and all the sort of bubbles. I'm using a highlight, a fine liner, not a highlight. Excuse me, getting a word jumble there. And all I'm doing, I'm just creating the illusion of sea foam. So this is all the sort of carpet area of the wave. So all I'm doing, I'm going round this area here, where it sort of joins onto the water. And again, just like we did with the turquoise, we're just using this harsher, brighter highlight now to create bubbles. So this is all the wash when it whacks into that rock. You get all the bubbles and froth. So let's have some here on this one to do the same. And all I'm doing, look, I'm just creating little holes and zigzags just to imply sort of the movement of the water and the churn of it. So if I zoom in for you, what we're going to do now, we're just going to create the sort of cap tops of the foam of the waves. So what I'm doing, I'm just creating sort of little teeth sort of shapes. So little just sort of lines coming down in the middle of these waves. I'm not going to have all of them the same. I want to have them quite random. Some being big, some being small. Just to give the impression of sort of wash at the tops of waves. So that's starting to take effect. And then we're just going to get some of the yellow and white. And we're going to start putting on our sea foam to make our waves look super realistic. So the first thing I always do is I always edge the outline of the wave. So all I'm doing, I'm just going round and just creating a nice thick outline. And this is all the sort of bubbles and sort of carpet sort of area of the wave that comes up onto the beach. And then all I do is I create little zigzags coming out from that. So I've got a really sharp fine liner, and all I do is I come out, and then I just create little zigzags, just coming out from that sharp outline. And because we've got that lovely blended underpainting, now we're starting to put all the detail on top. It will start looking super realistic. So look, we just come out, create little zigzags that join up onto that big thick outline. So little zigzags, little splodges. It's so much easier using a really sharp little brush, because it's almost like a pencil. You can just create really sharp detail. So let's have a little wave coming out here from this. Some of the areas joining up. Some smashing into the rocks, why not? And we can have some bubbles around the rocks where it's churning up. So look, if you do something a bit too harsh, it looks a bit too bright, you can always just go over it, just rub it out. So all I'm doing, I'm just creating little shapes, zigzags. But it's the colours underneath, now we've got the detail on top, that's the thing that creates the realism. So keep trying to emphasise that. So let's have some waves going across as well. So these are really shallow waves now, just coming into the shore. We can join it up this side, just so it all frames the painting. So this edge would sort of be coming up here, wouldn't it? And then I'm just going to wipe away most of the paint, and look, we're just going to do the same trick that we did with the waves. Look, I've just got this sort of really chalky residue. So imagine, look, a piece of chalk. So imagine you had a piece of chalk and you barely touched the canvas. Look, it would just leave a tiny mark. I'm just going to rub away. So we're doing that with a dry brush. We've got hardly any paint. We've got hardly any paint. It's just really subtle. We're just scraping it against the canvas, just leaving these really tiny chalky marks. They just look like waves and foam. So that is looking super realistic already. We've got these lovely waves, we've got this dark shadow coming towards us, and we've got this lovely transition and wash. So this area is all in the sunlight, but the area under the rocks would be a bit cooler. So we're just going to make a nice highlight that's a little tad cooler. So we're going to use blues to make it cool. So we're going to make the sky tone. So do you remember it was cerulean blue, cobalt blue, little dot of purple, and lots of white. So we're going to make the same colour as the sky. And we're just going to make a little cooler highlight where we've used that yellowy and white for all our areas in the sunlight for our waves. We're just going to mix the sky colour. We're going to load up our fine liner. And just under the rocks, if you imagine these areas will have it sort of back to the sun, we're just going to create some froth that's just a little bit cooler. So as I say, this picture is totally out of my imagination, but what's really cool is once you know all the recipes and you know how light works, you can create these scenes that look hyper realistic, and it's just by learning how to bring things forward, how to push things back, and all the colours. So once you know the trick, you can create anything by creating things in the light and things in the shade. So what I'm doing, I'm just using this cooler blue just under these areas. Same trick as we did before, we're just trying to create the illusion of some churn as the water hits the rocks. We can even have some just really subtly off here in the far distance. So this could be waves hitting the coast in the far distance. So all these little tricks just, you know, they don't look anything special, but when you stand away from the painting, these little extra bits are the things that create the realism. So really tiny. And we can even look, we can have some caps of waves off here in the distance. Just all these little finishing touches. Let's do the same here just to match it up. And then just to finish her, I'm going to take some bright white just here where the sun's sort of hitting the areas. I'm just going to go over the top and just make these areas just a bit brighter. And again, it's just to have a focus point for the viewer. You can make areas a little bit brighter and it sort of draws people in to look at them, you see. The same around these rocks. So I'm just using pure titanium white just to put some highlights on. Really subtle. And then you can do this trick. This is an easy trick. You can use a thing called a blender brush or a very soft brush. You can take off near enough all the paint like we did before. Have a dry brush and literally just take some of the sky colour and you can just go along the edge of your horizon and it just makes it softer. So it looks like it's blurring and fading off into the distance. So rather than have a really harsh horizon, you can just use a thing called a blender brush or a very soft bristle brush. Just go right up to your horizon, take some of the sky colour and just soften up that line just to make it look less harsh. And then all I'm going to do just to finish it, I'm just going to take some blue, some brown, some phthalo turquoise, some cobalt blue, some brown and some phthalo turquoise, a little bit of burnt sienna and a little bit more blues I think. I'm just going to create another harsh tone. I've got my flat brush and I'm just going to create some waves going off into the distance just on this dark blue ocean, just because it's a bit bland, just so everything looks finished. So again, I'm just using the sharp edge of the brush, it's really subtle. I'm just creating some really sharp lines just to look like waves. And I think she's finished. So I've signed her in the bottom corner. So you've learned how to use pastel shadows to push things back and then how to use darker shadows to bring things forward. You've learned how to do deep ocean water and how to make your horizon nice and soft. You've learned how to do an underpainting to create the illusion of shallow water, and then how to put waves and rocks and highlights and shadows over the top. How to darken your corners to get someone to focus down the middle of your painting and create this super realistic acrylic painting of a coastal beach. So my name is Murray. Thank you so much for watching. We have plenty of landscape painting tutorials here on my channel. So please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And take care. Don't forget to tag me at mstewartpaintings on Instagram with your versions of the painting. And happy painting, everyone. See you soon. Bye.